Hello, I'm going to be providing an overview of the authoritative data paper today, which was authored by the UN GGIM Policy and Legal Frameworks Working Group. The full title of the paper is Authoritative Data in an Evolving Geospatial Landscape, an Exploration of Policy and Legal Challenges. In terms of the agenda for this presentation, we will be closely following the paper's format, starting with a brief overview of the introduction, a brief discussion of the contents of part 1 of the paper, which draw from a cross-domain literature review. Part 2 discusses domain applications of authoritative data. Part 3 discusses authoritative data governance. And part 4 presents a path forward for decision makers, including policy and legal considerations. We will then conclude with the paper's conclusions. This paper on authoritative data, authority, and custodianship explores the various ways that authoritativeness is understood and used across different domains. Traditionally, we've seen a lot of jurisdictions recognize national mapping, cadastral, and land registration authorities as being official sources of legal and administrative geospatial information. Over the years, we've seen an evolution of applications of the concept of authoritativeness, including its adoption by other geospatial domains and in other contexts. The result of this evolution has been the different interpretation of notions of authoritativeness by different expert groups. Today, we see an increasing number of producers and providers of geospatial data, geospatial products, and geospatial services that may come from the public sector, private sector, or even the civil society sector. And these have entered the market, serving a variety of purposes and addressing a variety of needs. Across different domains and across different national contexts, we've seen authoritativeness and authoritative data, those concepts being defined differently or carrying different connotations. So this paper was developed in response to a need that the working group identified to develop a clearer understanding of what is meant by authoritative. When we were scoping the paper, we made our best effort to reflect the diversity of uses of the authoritative data designation, such that the paper was useful and applicable to a wide array of domains and national contexts. In some domains and in some national contexts, authoritative data is tightly regulated. And we might even see definitions of authoritativeness and authority in these cases entrenched in legislation. What this can mean is that policies, procedures, and mandates may be established in laws, which confer legal status to authoritative systems and authoritative data products. There are, though, other domains and other national contexts that have less formalized understandings of authoritative data. And these may involve less traditional or non-public actors and regulatory instruments, which we will get into some examples of when we discuss part 4 of the paper later in the presentation. In these cases, authoritative data is not always associated with a public authority or an authority with a legally binding mandate to provide and sustain it. For these reasons, part 1 of the paper is most relevant to domains and to national contexts that have less clearly defined understandings of authoritativeness and authoritative data. Additionally, part 3 of the paper introduces a framework for establishing data authoritativeness for those domains or in those contexts for which that guidance may be useful. Part 4 suggests a path forward for those who are seeking clarity in their governance of authoritative data production, use, and distribution, which is intended to be considered alongside expert consultation. On the other hand, These domains that use the authoritative data designation in a legal context may find that this guidance doesn't apply to them. So those that are seeking domain-specific guidance regarding authoritative data definitions and use should refer to the domain's corresponding subsection in Part 2. The range of interpretations of authoritativeness that we uncovered in the results of the paper's literature review and during the global consultation process suggested to us that domains should continue to define the concept in a manner that is useful to them and in a manner that reflects their domain or legal tradition. It's not the aim of this paper, of course, to unseat conceptions of authoritative data that are well established, unambiguous, or legally entrenched. With that caveat, I think we can get into the paper. Part 1 reflects the results of a cross-domain literature review and offers an overview of how various organizations understand and apply the authoritative data designation. It relates areas of shared understanding and areas of divergence with respect to the authoritative data designation, in addition to listing some governance considerations for data that has been designated as authoritative. In short, it explains how authoritative data is understood across a variety of geospatial domains and national contexts. Part 2 includes some domain perspectives on authoritative data applications, including for the geodesy, geographical names, marine, and land administration domains. So each of these subsections is authored by domain experts and discusses the authoritative data designation, practices, and use within each of those disciplines. Because I'm not a domain expert, I will refrain from going into detail on specific domain applications and understandings. Instead, I refer audience members who are looking for further information regarding these domain perspectives to Part 2 of the paper. In keeping with the paper's conventional research structure, Part 3 offers a discussion and analysis of the literature review that was summarized in Part 1. Part 3 arrives at several key insights. The first insight that we present in Part 3 is that because of this broad diversity of understandings and the different definitions that are used across domains and fields or in different countries, between producers, providers, coming from the public, private, civil society sectors, or maybe even from academia, we found that it's very difficult to establish a universal definition of authoritativeness. There are those domains that do have well-established geospatial information management systems who are able to offer clear-cut guidance about the meaning and application of authoritativeness. As I mentioned, in these circumstances, we tend to see definitions of authoritativeness being entrenched in law, with the notions of authority or custodianship of the data being tightly regulated. For those domains, for those national contexts that are seeking guidance on the use of the authoritative data designation, the paper suggests a fit-for-purpose frame. Effectively, this frame says, in order for any data asset, process, or organization to be considered as authoritativeness, it must be fit for its intended predefined purposes. Domains in national contexts that adhere to these precise or legally entrenched definitions of authoritative data may find that the framing doesn't really add value to their shared understanding, or it may fail to align with their use of the designation. In these cases, domains may find that there's no need to adopt this fit-for-purpose frame. On the other hand, those domains or national contexts that have less well-defined understandings of authoritative data, they may find the fit-for-purpose frame sheds light on some ambiguities, and they may use it to as a springboard for developing a national authoritative data governance model. Drawing from the insights that we presented in parts 1, 2, and 3 of the paper, we developed this diagram that illustrates the oversight of authoritative geospatial data and its distribution along a continuum, where we saw that instruments governing authoritative data were positioned between the endpoints of control and trust. So this figure illustrates this distribution across this continuum using selected examples of governance instruments that provide oversight of authoritative data. On the control end of the spectrum, oversight of authoritative data is tightly or precisely regulated, where definitions of authoritative data carry legal connotations. On the opposite end, on the trust end of the continuum, oversight of authoritative data is often less sensitive and therefore less tightly regulated. The continuum includes examples as well of governance instruments that may be employed to recognize the rights of Indigenous people regarding data. The treaties and convention category on the left side, for example, encompasses national context with parallel governance systems with distinct traditional Indigenous and conventional or public sector legal institutions operating concurrently. Part 4 also presents a path forward for domains and national contexts that are seeking guidance in their governance of authoritative data production, use, and distribution. It outlines as well potential considerations for decision makers hoping to develop a robust authoritative data governance framework. So it can be used to strengthen existing approaches or to design a new innovative authoritative data governance system, depending on the needs of the user. As I mentioned throughout the entirety of the presentation, and particularly with respect to the guidance that we offer in Part 4, I want to emphasize that it's our recommendation that domains should continue to define the concept of authoritative data and authoritativeness in accordance with their accepted traditions and expert-informed understandings. The purpose of the authoritative data governance guidance offered in Part 4 is to provide clarity to domains and to national contexts that are seeking it, not to unseat long-standing and accepted understandings. So the paper explored authoritative data, authoritativeness, and custodianship, and in doing so aimed to shine a light on the diversity of understandings of these topics that are held across domains and across national contexts. Parts 1 and 2 of the paper provided an overview and some examples of common understandings, uses, and domain applications of authoritative data. And while we know that the use of authoritative data designations has become ubiquitous across geospatial practitioners, our findings suggest that definitions often differ across domains and between sectors. It's also clear to us that the governance of authoritative data and practices for codifying the authoritative data designation are influenced by the legal systems, traditions, and customs of the nation states who employ them. For this reason, the paper doesn't attempt to advance a universal definition of authoritative data. Instead, Part 3 proposes the fit-for-purpose frame for decision makers that are seeking guidance in their use of the authoritative data designation, which is supported by the suggested guidelines for effective authoritative data governance, which are presented in Part 4. Thank you.